Back in March, Eliud Kipchoge raced the Tokyo Marathon in a pair of Alphafly 3s that you and I simply cannot go and buy. Now, back in March, you and I probably still couldn't have gone and bought a pair of Alphafly 3s, but availability for Alphafly 3s has gotten much better 6 months on from that race. But the shoe that Eliud raced the Tokyo Marathon in became known as the DEB 15 shoe. And the term DEB 15 comes from this, the list of approved shoes by World Athletics. These are the legal shoes that elites and pros can race in for any type of competitive racing. Now you can see right below the Alphafly 3, there's the DEB 15. So the blue shoes, all these 4 DEB models are Nike's current development models. So if you see an elite or pro racing in a development shoe, a prototype shoe, they need to be approved and on this list. And DEB 15 has been approved. Now, where that comes from is over the preceding days to the Tokyo Marathon, there were a lot of promotional photos all over Instagram and the internet of Eliud, doing shakeout runs, trying on different shoes, and then Running was publishing a bunch on their Instagram showing Eliud, sitting in his hotel room, putting on his Alphafly 3s, the stock Alphafly 3s that you and I can buy even to this day. The Volt colorway was new at the time. But the morning of the race in the elite tent, right before Eliud lined up at the start line for the Tokyo Marathon, a photo was taken showing his shoes on the right. Now you can see the medial side, the logo is in a different place. That's not the stock model. A lot of people were saying that the upper looks simple. There's a new upper material, or the geometry looks a little different. There were other photos of the shoe. There was a different outsole on the shoe as well. I thought I had a photo of it. It turns out that I don't. And people were thinking this is a lighter weight shoe to compete with the Evo 1 at the time. Now, any one of these things, but mostly that revised geometry or a different carbon fiber plate configuration would require this shoe to actually be considered a different shoe, a DEB model. But at the Tokyo Marathon, only Eliud Kipchoge was in this DEB 15 Alphafly, this special Alphafly 3. And no one else was in that shoe. There were a ton of photos of other Nike elites and pros racing in the Alphafly 3. They were all in stock Alphaflys, proto colorways, the Volt colorway, which again was new at the time. And since the Tokyo Marathon, over the past 6 months or so, a lot of Nike athletes have been racing in the Alphafly 3, and until recently, none of them have been in a non-stock Alphafly, at least that we could see. And that meant that the DEB 15, or this special Alphafly 3, sort of went cold. Nothing really happened for many months. About a month after the Tokyo Marathon, Nike had their big on-air event in Paris. And this was the big event where they released all of the Olympic kit. They did the initial push with all the Air stuff that we saw all summer. This is where they announced the Pegasus Premium. This was their big event. But at this event, a lot of the Nike VPs and stuff were giving interviews talking about a lot of different things. And 2 things resonated quite a bit. One was this innovation super cycle that is just starting, and the Peg Premium was really the kind of first shot at that. They were really showing where they're intending to go. Now, I made a whole video on both this event and the Peg Premium. Link in the description to both of those if you want the full detail. But the thing that's relevant for this conversation is they also softly announced a new structure for the running program. And again, whole video on the new structure for Nike running, link in the description. But essentially what it boils down to is that all the training silhouettes, as they were calling them, the structure, the Pegasus, and the Vomero will get 3 tiers, standard, plus, and premium. Again, I've covered this in detail. And they confirmed that, and now in the early fall, we're starting to see this. We're seeing the Peg Standard, the Peg 41. We saw the Peg Plus. We know the Peg Premium's coming. We're also seeing leaks of Vomero, the next Vomero, the Vomero Plus, which is the new Invincible. This structure's there. Nike's not really announced it, but it's definitely in place. But in the video where I talked about the structure, I also talked about what I thought Nike was going to do with their race shoes. And for their race shoes, this is what I actually thought they were going to do. So they're going to have the base model, the Alphafly 3, for example, and then they're going to do an elite model. And that was what I was actually thinking the DEB 15 was. It's an Alphafly 3 Elite. Now, I'll come back to the Elite tier that I was really convinced many months ago that was going to be coming, and now I'm actually sure because now we have proof of it coming from the Nike product line. But let's wrap up DEB 15. As I said, over the summer, there was nothing that really happened with DEB 15. We saw a ton of Nike Elites and Pros racing the Alphafly 3 and they were stock Alphafly 3s. That is until Jakob Ingebrigtsen raced his half marathon at the Copenhagen Half Marathon and blew up rather spectacularly. So interesting story from a running standpoint and Jakob's goals and where he's trying to go with his running. But for us as shoe nerds, something also very interesting happened. And it's really here in this photo from Jakob's Instagram where he's blown up and wasted on the ground, but we can see the bottom of his shoes. And those don't look like stock Alphafly 3s. Now this is important because the night before Jakob posted his flat lay or bib lay, yes, elites and pros do that as well on Instagram, of his bib with a pair of just stock blueprint Alphafly 3s. And he was also seen in some press photos and some press events leading up to that half wearing those shoes. But on race day, he was in these shoes. And if we show these shoes side by side with a stock pair of proto colorway Alphafly 3s, you can very obviously see that at least the outsole is very different. Now, a lot of people are also saying that the heel foam is different. But if you look at your Alphafly 3, you'll see that there's rails of foam on the medial and lateral side, and they're pushed to the edges. And I think the angle of Jakob's feet in this photo make it just look like there's a difference there because we can't really see the plate just because of the angle. I don't think there's any difference in the foam configuration of the plate, but there's obviously a difference in the outsole. And that's quite important because, again, that's the first showing of Dev 15 in many months, but also it aligns with something else that we're seeing released in the Nike product line. Now, over the summer leading up into the Olympics, Nike released these 3 spikes, the Maxfly 2, the Victory 2, and the Dragonfly 2. Now, these were the spikes that were leading into the Olympics. They made a big event about this. 2 of these have air in them. This was a big deal. But something else that launched with these spikes is there's actually a second version of the Dragonfly. There's the Dragonfly 2 Elite. Now, that's a big deal because that's released product. Now, if we look at the Dragonfly 2 and the Dragonfly 2 Elite side by side, and these are the photos from Nike.com, these are the shoes that you can go buy right now. Maybe not this colorway because I think it just came out, but you can go buy the shoe right now. You can see that fundamentally these are the same shoe, but there are 2 key differences. The most obvious one visually is the outsole. The outsole on the Dragonfly 2 Elite is slightly different. It's slightly simpler because the biggest change in the Dragonfly 2 is that the plate in that shoe is a carbon fiber plate, whereas the plate in the stock or base Dragonfly 2 is a PVEX plate. So the Dragonfly 2 gets a carbon fiber plate, which makes the outsole a little different, or the spike plate a little different, the grip around the area in the forefoot. Also, the pins of the actual spikes are non-removable because the studs that anchor them into the plate need to be a little different because of the carbon fiber. But overall, the Dragonfly 2 is a subtle refinement focused more around an Elite over the Dragonfly 2. Essentially, visually, an outsole difference. Very similar to what we were seeing with the Alphafly 3. Now, the actual differences between the Dragonfly 2 and the Dragonfly 2 Elite are about 6 or 8 grams, depending on where you actually look at the specs. Running Warehouse is reporting that the Dragonfly 2 is 142 grams, and they're saying the Dragonfly 2 Elite is 136 grams. I've seen it mentioned to be a little lighter, but fundamentally it's a refinement of the shoe that makes it a little bit more elite focused, but that carbon fiber plate is going to make a huge difference in how that shoe runs. And we've seen all the Nike Elites that are racing in the Dragonfly are generally picking the Dragonfly 2 Elite to actually race in, if they're not picking the Victory 2 track spike over the Dragonfly now. We've also seen a lot of middle distance and long distance Nike track athletes training in the Dragonfly 2 and then maybe choosing the Dragonfly 2 Elite for the 5,000 or mostly the 10,000 meter races. So it's interesting to see the Nike Elites and Pros using both of these spikes. But to me, this is the biggest sort of confirmation that we are going to see these elite shoes coming from Nike on their racers, because the Dragonfly change between the Dragonfly 2 and the Dragonfly 2 Elite is exactly what we're seeing with the Alphafly 3 and the Alphafly 3 Dev 15 or Alphafly 3 Elite, I guess you could call it. And Nike's confirmed the product naming in their actual marketing copy. So that elite tier of race shoes is, for me, all but confirmed now. But why would Nike do this? Why would Nike create another tier for their super shoes above what they have, at the base? Well, this is a thing that people keep saying Nike's not innovating anymore. This is Nike really opening the doors for them to innovate. By doing the tiers in their trainers, this allows them to really innovate and push, but keep the base models or the standard models, where they should be. Then you use the other two tiers to really innovate and try different things. And that makes sense in their actual race shoes as well. Specifically though, this will allow Nike to create a base model, for example, the Vaporfly 3, that works really well for non-elite runners. Like for me, I love the Vaporfly, and the Vaporfly 3 is to me the best Vaporfly, but I'm not an elite runner. The sweet spot of the Vaporfly 3 is much broader, but what makes the Vaporfly 3 better for a non-elite runner, you and me, probably is what makes it not so good for an elite runner, which is why you're seeing a lot of East African Nike runners still racing in the Vaporfly Next% 1 or 2. Though European, Japanese, and most American Nike elites have all switched over to the Vaporfly 3 or now the Alphafly 3. But by keeping the base model, the consumer-friendly version, but making subtle tweaks to that, again, think back to the Dragonfly 2, changing the plate to a different material, making it a little bit lighter, making the outsole maybe a little bit more aggressive, changes the shoe just enough to make it more elite friendly. So now you have a consumer friendly model, and then you have an elite friendly model that fundamentally can look the same. And we've seen this recently with Adidas and the Evo 1, the Adios Pro 4, and the Evo SL. They all sort of look the same, but the Adios Pro 4 and the Evo 1, as we saw in Berlin, on a racer's foot, they look nearly identical. There are subtle changes, but they look nearly identical. If you look at the Dragonfly 2 and Dragonfly 2 Elite, you're not going to be able to tell the difference of those on someone's foot on a track. And I think that's very intentional. So this allows the brand to have a shoe that's going to work for a consumer, but also work for an elite. And that's something Nike specifically has been struggling with all this year. And having an elite tier to the Vaporfly or really any Nike race shoe is nothing new. Nike has done this for a long time. There have been elite versions of shoes going way back with Nike. Specifically, if we go back to 2017 when the Vaporfly 4% launched, it launched close or next to a Vaporfly Elite. And over the years, we had other Vaporfly Elite or fly print versions, special versions that were lighter or more technically advanced, or, a lot of different changes. We've had these shoes. So Nike going back to making an elite tier for their super shoes or their race shoes makes complete sense. And all of this circles back to the big innovation supercycle that Nike announced back at the Ave Air event in April. The fact that the Peg Premium, which is the shoe that they showed off back at the Ave Air event, being something that's flashy, that got headlines, that looks really cool, that has some cool tech and some new things that Nike wasn't capable of doing before, being just the tip of the iceberg of what they're doing, I think we've seen Nike through the remainder of 2024 begin to pay this off, begin to show their hand a little bit with the Dragonfly 2, Dragonfly 2 Elite, some of the new race shoes that are coming out, some of the stuff that we've seen on Elite and Pro's feet. I think we're just seeing the beginning of Nike's innovation teams really waking up and seeing the brand move forward. And I think for Nike fans and people who run and race in Nike primarily, it's a super exciting time. And I think for running in general, it's a super exciting time because this means that both Nike and Adidas, plus a bunch of other brands, are really beginning to push forward into what is next. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.